So we do meet, about.
I wanted to turn to the issue of tar sands. In Washington, a group of lawmakers are calling on the Obama administration to take a closer look at the significant environmental impacts of a proposed massive pipeline that would carry Canadian tar sands oil 2,000 miles from northern Alberta all the way down to refineries in Texas and tankers off the Gulf Coast. In a letter to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, nearly 50 members of the House said the State Department, quote, must determine whether the project is in the national interest in terms of clean energy and climate change priorities. Tar sands mining emits 3 times more greenhouse gas pollution than traditional oil and has come under heavy criticism from environmental and Indigenous groups. On Wednesday, Indigenous leaders attending the U.S. Social Forum, where we just came from in Detroit, held a group dinner to discuss various issues affecting their communities. Democracy Now!'s Mike Burke was at the scene. He spoke with a Canadian Indigenous activist and asked him about Canada's tar sands.
My name's Clayton Thomas Mueller. I'm a Cree man from northern Manitoba, Canada, from the community of Pugatawagan First Nation, and I'm the tar sands campaign organizer with the Indigenous Environmental Network. IEN, in partnership with the Defenders of the Land Network as well as the Toronto Mobilization Network, are converging with many allies from all across North America and internationally in the streets of Toronto and community centers and different venues to highlight the gross human rights violations that are being perpetuated by the neoliberal agenda that the so-called world leaders are converging to discuss in a very highly militarized downtown Toronto metro region. For us at IEN, we're using this as an opportunity to highlight Canada and the United States' gross failure in regards to their energy and climate policy and the ongoing oppression of Indigenous peoples and the destruction of our land and water resources, and of course, catastrophic climate change of which our people suffer disproportionately. Which is essentially what they're going to be talking about, ways to expand on energy development. And of course, tar sands development, which is Canada's greatest climate crime, will definitely be one of the things that they're talking about. So, we will be in the streets of Toronto tomorrow. We've sent out an international call to action for June 24th, which is part of 4 themed days of action, including environmental justice and a couple of other themes. But this theme is specifically to highlight Canada's failure to ratify, to recognize and ratify the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Canada's ongoing policy of termination of Indian rights and title. Of course, to highlight the horrific missing and murdered women's situation going on in Canada, and a failure of the government to look into it and to address it. There are over 500 missing and murdered Aboriginal women in the country with virtually no response from the government nor its police apparatus. And of course, our primary issue that we're elevating as the Indigenous Environmental Network is, the whole situation going on with the world's largest and most destructive development ever in the history of mankind, known as the tar sands in northern Alberta.
Now, who are the companies that are profiting in the tar sands, and where's the oil going? It's recovered there.
Well, I think, if you really drop a list of every single major oil corporation on the planet, you'll find them in northern Alberta. Last on the list, of course, is the extremely controversial, not that all of them aren't, but extremely controversial BP, who just this year has aggressively been trying to enter into the tar sands. And of course, they're the last major global oil company to come into the tar sands patch. However, we've been campaigning against them very aggressively on the lead up to their shareholder meeting last month in London to pressure them to stay out of the tar sands. And then, of course, the situation in the Gulf of Mexico has happened. So, we'll see if BP will become prey to its own predatorial culture.
Now, how dependent is the United States on oil from the tar sands?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at a lot of the viral media, there's a lot of folks who ask people in America, where does America get their oil? And everybody says the Middle East. But the number one provider of oil and gas to the United States is, of course, Canada. Right now, within the tar sands, there's approximately 1.8 million barrels produced every single day, with 68% of that going to the United States directly. Mm-hmm.
And what makes tar sands exploration so much more destructive than typical oil exploration?
Well, this is essentially your bottom of the barrel. There is no greater representation of both the just the desperateness of big oil to hardwire itself into the global economy for the next 150 years through scraping that bottom of the barrel. This is peak oil. Tar sands really shouldn't even be referred to as oil. It's an entirely different classification of fossil fuel. It's about 10% fossil fuel mixed with 90% clay and sand, and they have to remove vast tracts of the boreal forest, which of course is a critical carbon sink, second biggest on the planet next to the Amazon rainforest. And as a result of the mining and in situ SAGD operations in the tar sands to extract this oil from under the boreal rainforest, it is also the place that is experiencing the second fastest rate of deforestation. And of course, all of this is exacerbated by climate-related forest catastrophes like the spruce pine beetle, which are devastating, literally millions of hectares of boreal forest. And so, the process itself of separating the oil from the sand, of mining it out of the earth, they're using the biggest trucks on the planet to move this stuff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 300 tons per truck carrying capacity, the biggest earth movers on the planet, 10 stories high, 300 tons per scoop, are operating 24/7 in Canada's tar sands. They have a workforce of 77,000 workers to drive this massive, massive development. And so, to provide a scale for the viewers, they move enough earth every single day in Canada's tar sands to fill up the Toronto Skydo. They burn enough natural gas every day to superheat water to remove the oil from the sand and clay, 600 million cubic feet per day, and that's enough to heat 2.4 million Canadian homes. So, the impact is absolutely catastrophic, particularly to local Dene, Cree, and Métis peoples who have, subsisted and relied on those sacred lands in northern Alberta for time immemorial. And these communities have been put on the sacrificial block of American and Canadian energy and climate policy. And our campaign with the Indigenous Environmental Network is really to highlight and magnify the issues that frontline communities are facing to the world, to internationalize their struggle, and to amplify their voices to the world, because we believe that our communities must speak for themselves on these issues of energy and climate justice, that we must be the ones leading the charge if we're going to truly get to a place where we can build an economic paradigm that does not sacrifice one community for the benefit of communities thousands of miles away.
And can you talk more about the boreal forest? I understand there's a controversial agreement that was recently reached regarding the future of the forest.
Yeah, the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement, is a partnership between 8 mainstream ENGOs, including Greenpeace and Forest Ethics, and 20 huge forestry companies. The controversy surrounding this agreement, which, theoretically was designed to create the largest conservation area on the planet, is that, there's a lot of hype there. That essentially what the agreement right now is a good faith moratorium self-imposed by the forestry sector on areas where the woodland caribou exists, which is an endangered species in Canada. However, one of the challenges is that neither the forestry sector or the ENGO sector consulted with First Nations on this agreement. And in Canada, it is constitutionally enshrined the duty to consult First Nations on all matters pertaining to developments or agreements that impact traditional or treaty territories. They must be consulted at the earliest stage of the conception of that idea. And, you know, obviously there was no consultation, and so it's created great division and, you know, caused a lot of mistrust in all sectors and all social movements. And so there's a lot of discussion and debate right now, you know, and